Hey, I'm Paige Shipley, and I want to talk to you about fair isle knitting, my favorite technique ever. We are going to be talking about the Dietes pillow today. You certainly don't have to follow along with this pattern, but I'll reference it a few times. This lesson is pretty good for anything fair isle though. So first thing is project selection and yarn. I suggest starting with a smaller project and something that's not fitted. We'll get to that later. So if you're doing a pillow for your first project, awesome. Let's do yarn. Let's talk about yarn. I use wool and wool blends for fair isle, and I highly suggest you do the same, at least to start with. Wool is a nice sticky fiber, which means your stitches are going to stay where you put them. You could also throw in a little, camelid fiber content like, alpaca, llama, camel, something like that. But I would try to stay away from plant fibers like cottons, linens, hemps, or acrylic yarns because they're just not going to have the grabby quality that you really want in fair isle, at least for your first few projects. All right, so fair isle is all about tension, and if you're new to this technique, that is going to be the really hard part to master. Fabric in fair isle behaves differently than other fabrics. It's not nearly as stretchy. So here's a hat with a sports team that I'm not going to actually name for copyright purposes, but see how the non-fair isle part stretches and then the fair isle part stretches? It's different. And then this at the bottom is corrugated ribbing, and that's a whole other beast. We'll talk about that towards the end. So just keep that in mind when you're selecting a pattern for your body if it needs to be fitted. Fair isle behaves differently than others, and your tension is going to make a huge difference. So today we're going to cover fair isle knitting. I'm going to show you how to do it English, or throwing with your right hand, or continental, picking with your left hand. And then I'm also going to show you how I prefer to do it, which is one yarn in each hand. And that sounds crazy, but bear with me. I think it's easy and I really enjoy the rhythm of it. So we will get into that. Towards the end, we're going to talk about anchoring, and that's something you need to pay attention to in selecting your first couple patterns, just to make sure you're not getting yourself into something tangier than you intended. All right, let's show some knitting. Okay, so let's talk about our chart for just a minute. Here's our pattern. I'm going to scooch it a little closer to the camera. There we go. We read fair isle charts and all knitting charts the opposite of the way we read paper. So normally, when you're reading something, you start, left, go right, and then top to bottom. We're going to do the opposite here. So we're going to start in the very corner, bottom right corner, and there are numbers here, so that kind of helps. But we are going to start in the right and work our way left. So you can see that there are 4 in our main color and then 1 in our accent color. And then we'll just, well, that's to start with. And then there's 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1. So that's real easy to get us started. So I'm going to show you how you would do it if you were just to do it English, so all picking. And this is not the yarn that we use for the Dietes class. It is just a little fair isle scrap I have going for teaching purposes, so disregard the colors. Okay, so we'll just start here. When adding your accent color, there's my hand. Okay, when adding your accent color, just place it in. We're not going to tie it in or anything. All right, so I like to hold my main color and my, oops, sorry, I said I was going to do this English first. All right, so before I start knitting, let's think about sewing machines. And if you're familiar with sewing machines, you know that one thread is always coming from the top and one thread is always coming from the bottom. And I want you to think about that when you're knitting fair isle, and that'll stop you from getting your yarns crossed. So pick which one goes from the top and pick which one goes from the bottom and write it down. So I'm going to have my pink come in from the top and my blue come in from the bottom. And I'm going to really try to exaggerate it for the video, and then you'll have a better understanding. When you understand where things come from and what they're doing, then you can kind of start taking your own shortcuts. So I just put in one pink, and then I'm going to go back to my main color. So again, write it down. If you're anything like me and put projects down and you think you're going to put them down for 5 minutes and you actually put them down for 1.5 years, it's going to be really obvious when you pick it up and start knitting it differently. Okay, so from the bottom, I am taking my blue yarn and I am carrying it under the pink stitch and putting it into place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I'm just going to drop it there. I'm going to take my pink yarn and bring it up from the top and just place my next stitch in there. Don't pull. It's natural to want to pull thinking I'm going to make this stitch stick. And that's not really how it works. You're going to end up with some terrible puckering and tension issues if you pull. So just relax, think about placing the stitch. I'm going to drop my pink, bring my blue in from the bottom, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, drop it, bring my pink in from the top, and just place it. And bring the blue in from the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, drop it, pink from the top, and one more time, bring that blue in from the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's how you would do 2 colors held in the English or throwing style. So let's say you want to do continental, and do not switch mid-project. That'll mess your gauge up, that'll mess everything up. So you can buy these little rings that hold the yarn where you want it to be and keep it separate. You can definitely try that out. I normally knit with a small child nearby, and I often have to drop my knitting and run and get something out of her mouth or stop her from climbing something, so that doesn't really work with my lifestyle. So I'm going to keep that pink from the top. This is a little harder to see, but you'll want to keep those in the same order. So I just took my pink from the top, and then getting that blue from the bottom. Again, keep that tension in mind. If you find yourself tightening up at any point, just put your knitting down, walk away for a little bit, go do something else, come back in a little bit. We are just placing our stitches in there because we do not want this tight and puckering up. So see, that pink is on top. Those pink stitches are always going to be on the top. And that blue is always going to be on the bottom. It's a little awkward because I'm not holding it in my usual position because I'm trying to film it. Oops. All right, so now I want to show you how I do it. And again, do not switch mid-project. So if you want to do the whole thing continental, do it. If you want to do the whole thing English, do it. But don't switch mid-project like I'm doing. This is just a teaching sample. So I normally like to hold my main color in my left hand. That's just the rhythm that I like. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm holding the main color in my left hand, and then I just drop in my accent color with my right. And eventually I just get a nice little rhythm. So 4, 5, and place that stitch. Just really be mindful about placing that stitch in there. If you find your yarns are tangling up over here and you get that barber pole look, then that means you are not keeping one on top and one on the bottom. When I'm doing something with more than one, actually with more than 2 colors, then I like to do all the accent colors in my right hand. I know there are a lot of Fair Isle knitters who prefer to keep all their accent colors in their left hand. This just feels better to me. And again, write it down. I like to do a little rhyme, like light, or not necessarily rhyme, but light in the left, bright in the right, or something like that. That helps me remember. And place that stitch. Now, so those are called floats. The rule of thumb when you are doing floats is not more than 1 inch. So for me, that's about 5 stitches. And I kind of go by 5 stitches, whether I'm doing, fingering weight or sport weight like this. I just don't exceed 5 inches. So if you look at our pattern, we don't really have to worry about floats because the biggest gap there is in this pattern is 5 stitches. So we don't have to worry about floats until we get up to this area here. So actually I lied. We've got our first thing over 5. So we've got 7 at one point in there. So what do we do to trap those stitches? And I'm just going to show this technique in with my usual English and Continental blend. So let's say we have a whole bunch of blue stitches, and then we have a pink stitch. We need to carry that pink stitch with us. So I'm going to start that next blue stitch. I'm going to place my pink yarn over the blue yarn, and I'm going to knit. And then I'm going to put that pink yarn back. So then carry that back over and knit again. You've just anchored a float. So that helps you carry, see, and you can kind of see a little bit of that pink behind it. And that's important. We'll get to that in just a second. But that helps us carry the float without actually having a pink stitch. When you have really long floats, it's easy to mess up your tension, and it's really easy to just, accidentally grab a float when you're putting something on. Like I've caught many floats on earrings or rings or something, and then you've got a big snag. So again, so start your blue stitch, place your pink over the yarn in the back, knit that blue stitch, put that pink back where it is, and then keep going. And then when you're ready for a pink stitch, just drop it in. All right, I wanted to show you one more little tension trick. If you find yourself not carrying your inside yarn loosely enough, you can flip your knitting inside out. And I feel like it's easier to do once you've got a couple inches going. You don't change the direction of your knitting. You are just putting the inside of your knitting, or the right side of your knitting, on the inside. Obviously this is only going to work if you're knitting in the round. So, what this does is that it forces you to carry just a smidge farther. Seriously, maybe a millimeter farther. But it does loosen things up if you are if you're having a little bit of a tension issue. I find a lot of my tension issues can be solved with a glass of wine, but if you are just starting Fair Isle, I'm not sure I'd go there quite yet. So that's just another little tension trick. In the beginning, it's really natural to just pull that stitch. Just keep in mind you're placing it. Keep your little sewing machine in mind. One color always coming from the top, one always coming from the bottom. And put it down, shake it out, relax, go do something else, and then come back and do it often. And please, please, please write down what yarn goes in what hand, or what yarn goes on top versus bottom. Because if you pick it up again and do it differently, it'll be really, really obvious. Okay, so just to talk a little bit more about my anchors and floats, here's a sweater I'm working on right now. It has not been blocked, so don't judge too harshly. blocking does magic for Fair Isle. Anyhow, so what I have is a whole bunch of white, and then I needed to anchor the gray. And it's especially challenging when you're anchoring a dark color behind a light color because it's easy to show through. We were working with the tweed earlier, and it's really easy to hide anchors in tweeds because it just looks like another little color fleck. So I love tweeds for Fair Isle for that reason. Anyhow, so we've got way more than 1 inch on some of this white on these cats. So when you're anchoring, it's really important to stagger, especially if you have, like big pieces. So like on one round, I would anchor like here, and then the following round I'd anchor there, and then the next round, kind of back towards the outsides. But it's really important to keep staggering those so that you don't get some bulky line where you kept anchoring in the same place. So stagger your anchors when you are floating a whole bunch. All right. And again, we were talking about like that fabric difference earlier between what's Fair Isle and what's not. So that's how Fair Isle stretches, and that's how the rest stretches. So keep that in mind. That's why you see a lot of Fair Isle patterns with positive ease. So what that means is, like, if your bust size is 34 inches, plan on knitting like something that's 37, 38 inches or more, because you just don't have a lot of give in that fabric. All right, let's talk about one of my other little favorite parts of Fair Isle, and this is called corrugated ribbing. It means you are going to be purling in one color and knitting in the other. I think it's fantastic for hat brims, like sleeve ribbing. I've got a hat handy somewhere. Oh, here we are. Again, here's the local sports team hat that I'm not going to say their names out loud. So this is corrugated ribbing. And I'm going to try to get that closer to the camera. So you can maybe see that the blue is purling and the white is knitting. I also want to make a note that you should cast on in the color that you're purling in. Otherwise, you'll end up with these weird little split rows. So cast on in the color that you're going to purl in. Alrighty then. So we're just going to keep going on this random sample of nothing, and so just disregard the row below. So knit 2 in blue, and then we're going to purl in pink. So bring that again from the top, purl 2, and then take that yarn back, then bring in from the bottom, knit 2, bring the yarn up, purl 2. Oops, I think I'm knitting from my tail. Oh well, doesn't matter, it's just a sample.
Why do you bring the purling back to the back after every...
Oh, because I will show you what happens if you don't. You'll end up with your float in front of your stitches. So, purl 2, then we're going to knit 2, then I'm going to purl 2, and oops, I just carried my float across the 2 blues. So it's not a difficult thing to fix. If you caught yourself doing it in the row below, you just kind of, take your stitches off the needle and pull them up in front of that float. But that's what happens. It's a really easy thing to forget. So purl 2 in pink, take it back, knit 2 blue, bring your pink forward, take your pink back, purl 2, sorry, knit 2 in blue. Goodness, need more caffeine. Pink, pink, take it back. Okay, that's corrugated ribbing. And it's a fantastic way to start or end a Fair Isle project. Unfortunately, it's just not a good thing to teach at the beginning of the Fair Isle class. So again, if you're going to do corrugated ribbing, I would strongly suggest starting in the color in which you're going to purl. So here's another example of something that took a lot of anchoring. So there's a lot of real estate between these white stitches and the blue. So let me show you what this looks like from the back. So here's where the floats are, and you can kind of see that little anchor. Let me make sure it's showing up in the monitor. There we go. So right there, that's what anchoring looks like from the back once it's all done. Again, this has been blocked, so give yourself a little grace. If you have not blocked your project yet, it makes a huge difference. So when in doubt, block it. It's just magic. All right, that concludes our Fair Isle class. Message me if you have any questions, and I will eventually get some links up when the Dietes pattern is published officially. Happy crafting!